Santa Clara County Superior Court, Monday morning. The courtroom was packed with people who had waited 43 years for this moment. In the front row sat Tracy Lancaster, Karen Stitt's best friend, now a woman in her late 50s. Beside her, Michael Calhoun, Karen's former boyfriend, gripped his prepared statement with trembling hands. And in the back, members of the Stitt family, some who had known Karen, others born after her death but raised on stories of the aunt they never met. At the defense table sat Gary Jean Ramirez, 78 years old, hunched over with a cane, long gray hair, thick glasses. His attorney had requested he not appear on camera. Threats of violence had been made if his face appeared on television or social media. He looked like someone's grandfather, harmless, frail.
But this man, when he was 38 years old, had sexually assaulted a 15-year-old girl and stabbed her yet times. 18 of those wounds were to her heart.
Judge Hanley Chu reviewed the case file one final time. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. Ramirez had pleaded no contest to first-degree murder 3 months earlier. Today was sentencing. "Mr. Ramirez," Judge Chu began, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of delayed justice. "You are sentenced to 25 years to life in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. You will be eligible for parole after 25 years. Ramirez, who would be 103 years old if he survived to parole eligibility, showed no reaction. He sat silently, looking down, as victim impact statements were read. Tracy Lancaster approached the microphone. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Since Karen was brutally taken from us, there have been many unanswered questions. Why, being the biggest. Why did you do this to our Karen? She was just 15 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her." Michael Calhoun was next. "Just because you've been caught, finally, and you will start serving your sentence, your punishment for your brutally gruesome crime, there will still never be closure. Karen is gone. We will never get her back." As Ramirez was led out of the courtroom in shackles, heading to prison for the remainder of his life, the question everyone had was the same. How did a killer who left blood and bodily fluids at a crime scene evade justice for 43 years? How did he live in Hawaiian paradise while Karen's family suffered? The answer lies in a story that begins on September 2nd, 1982, when a 15-year-old girl took a bus to visit her boyfriend and never made it home. Before we go back to that September night, hit that subscribe button. This case was solved using the same forensic genetic genealogy that caught the Golden State Killer. It proves that no matter how many decades pass, DNA doesn't forget. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And let's honor Karen Stitt's memory by making sure her story is never forgotten. Now, let's go back 43 years to a September evening in California's Silicon Valley. Karen Stitt was 15 years old, a sophomore at Palo Alto High School. September 2nd, 1982 was a Thursday, the last day before the long Labor Day weekend. Karen was excited. She had plans to see her boyfriend, David Woods, in Sunnyvale, about 10 miles from her home in Palo Alto. Karen was the kind of teenager every parent hoped to raise. Responsible, thoughtful, never gave her parents trouble. Her mother, Catherine Leszewski, and father, Robert Stitt, trusted Karen to take the bus to see her boyfriend. It was 1982, a time when teenagers had more freedom, when parents didn't track their children's every movement with GPS, when taking public transit felt safe. Around 7 p.m. that evening, Karen left her Palo Alto home and walked to the bus stop. She wore casual clothes, jeans, a shirt, a jacket. She carried a small purse with some money and her bus fare. The bus ride from Palo Alto to Sunnyvale took about 30 minutes. Karen knew the route well. She'd taken it many times before. She arrived in Sunnyvale around 7:45 p.m. and met David at their usual spot. They spent the evening together, talking, laughing, enjoying each other's company the way teenage couples do. Time passed quickly. Before they knew it, it was approaching midnight.
"I should get home," Karen said, checking the time. "The last bus leaves soon."
David walked Karen to the bus stop at the intersection of Wolf Road and El Camino Real. It was a well-lit area, a major intersection in Sunnyvale. The bus stop had a bench and a posted schedule. Other people were around. This wasn't a deserted, dangerous area. It was a normal suburban bus stop. They arrived at the stop around midnight. The bus schedule showed the last bus to Palo Alto would arrive in about 10 minutes.
"I should wait with you," David said, though his voice carried hesitation. He glanced at his watch. Midnight was already past his curfew. His parents were strict about him being home on time. If he waited for Karen's bus and then walked home, it would be after 12:30 a.m. He'd be in trouble. "It's okay," Karen reassured him. "The bus will be here in a few minutes."
"You should go home." David hesitated. Something felt wrong. But he was 16 years old, worried about parental punishment, and Karen seemed confident she'd be fine.
"Are you sure?"
"I'm sure." "Go. Join you. Go. New state with, I believe." David Woods watched Karen walk toward the bus stop bench. Then he turned and headed home. It was the last time anyone who loved Karen would see her alive. That decision, to leave Karen alone at that bus stop, would haunt David Woods for the rest of his life. Rick Morrison was a delivery truck driver for a local business. His route took him through industrial areas of Sunnyvale early in the morning before businesses opened. On Friday, September 3rd, 1982, he was driving along El Camino Real when something caught his eye. Behind a cinderblock wall near the bus stop at Wolf Road, partially hidden in bushes, was what looked like a body. Morrison stopped his truck. His heart pounding, he approached cautiously. What he saw made him immediately return to his truck and call 911 from his radio. It was a young woman, naked, her wrists bound with what appeared to be her own shirt, a jacket tied around her left ankle. She was obviously dead, had been for hours, and the amount of blood surrounding her suggested extreme violence. Sunnyvale police arrived within minutes. Officers secured the scene and called for homicide detectives. By 8 a.m., the area was cordoned off with yellow crime scene tape. The morning commuters driving past had no idea that a teenage girl lay dead just yards from where they stopped at red lights every day. Detective Robert Chen was the lead investigator assigned to the case. A 20-year veteran of the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety, Chen had worked dozens of homicides. But nothing prepared him for what he saw that September morning. The victim, later identified as Karen Stitt, had been subjected to unimaginable violence. The preliminary examination revealed 59 stab wounds. Not one or two in a moment of rage, not a handful in a brief attack. 59 separate stab wounds covering her body. 18 of those wounds were to her chest and heart area, any one of them potentially fatal. The killer had stabbed her over and over and over, long past the point of death. Sexual assault. The evidence of rape was clear. The killer had sexually assaulted Karen either before, during, or after the stabbing attack. Bindings. Karen's wrists were bound with her own shirt. Her jacket was tied around her left ankle. This suggested the killer had used her own clothing to restrain her, preventing her from fighting back or escaping. Location. Karen's body was hidden behind a cinderblock wall about 100 yards from the bus stop where David had left her. The wall showed bloodstains. Karen had been attacked here, against this wall. The killer had then attempted to hide her body in nearby bushes. Evidence left behind. Most critically, for the future investigation, the killer had left biological evidence at the scene.
His blood, likely from cuts sustained during the frenzied attack, was found on the cinderblock wall and on Karen's body. His bodily fluids from the sexual assault remained on the victim. In 1982, this biological evidence couldn't definitively identify a killer, but investigators carefully collected and preserved everything, hoping that someday technology might advance. The medical examiner determined that Karen had died sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., shortly after David had left her at the bus stop.
Detectives worked the case aggressively in the days following Karen's murder. The brutality of the crime, a 15-year-old girl sexually assaulted and stabbed 59 times, generated intense media coverage and public pressure to solve the case quickly.
The boyfriend. David Woods was interviewed extensively. He admitted he'd left Karen at the bus stop around midnight. He provided his timeline, walked home, arrived around 12:20 a.m. His parents confirmed he was home by 12:30 a.m. But the guilt in his voice was palpable.
I should have waited with her,
David told Detective Chen, tears streaming down his face. I should have stayed. I was worried about being in trouble with my parents, and now Karen's dead. If I had just waited 10 more minutes. David became the prime suspect immediately. Statistics showed that in cases where young women were murdered, the boyfriend or ex-boyfriend was usually responsible. David had been the last known person to see Karen alive. He had motive, teenage relationship drama, means, was physically capable, and opportunity, was with her that night. But David's timeline was tight. If he'd walked Karen to the bus stop at midnight and been home by 12:30 a.m., confirmed by his parents, when did he have time to attack her? The distance from the bus stop to David's home was about a mile. Walking at a normal pace, it would take 20 to 25 minutes. The attack on Karen would have required time. The sexual assault, the 59 stab wounds, attempting to hide the body. At least 15 to 20 minutes. The timeline didn't quite work. But detectives kept David as their primary suspect for years. The bus stop. Investigators canvassed the area around Wolf Road and El Camino Real. Did anyone see Karen after midnight? Did anyone see her get into a vehicle? Did anyone see a suspicious person in the area? Several witnesses reported seeing a young woman matching Karen's description at the bus stop around midnight. But no one reported seeing an attack or anyone approaching her. The bus stop was in a relatively busy area. Cars passed regularly, even at midnight. How had someone abducted Karen, assaulted her, and murdered her without anyone noticing? The most likely scenario. Karen had been grabbed quickly, possibly at knife point, and forced behind the cinderblock wall where she was out of sight from the street. The attack happened in an area just hidden enough that passing cars wouldn't see. The weapon. The knife used to stab Karen 59 times was never found. The killer had taken it with him. The wounds suggested a large knife or possibly a small machete, something capable of inflicting deep, devastating injuries. The biological evidence. This was 1982. DNA analysis was still years away from being used in criminal investigations. The first DNA-based conviction in the United States wouldn't occur until 1987, 5 years in the future. In 1982, the blood and bodily fluids left by Karen's killer could be typed AB, ABO blood types, but couldn't identify a specific individual. Detectives collected everything. Blood samples from the cinderblock wall, swabs from Karen's body, her clothing. Everything was carefully preserved, documented, logged into evidence storage. Maybe someday, Detective Chen said to his partner, science will advance enough to use this evidence. Until then, we investigate the old-fashioned way. News of Karen's murder sent shockwaves through Palo Alto and Sunnyvale. A 15-year-old girl
waiting for a bus, had been grabbed and brutally murdered. If it could happen to Karen, a responsible teenager in a well-lit area, it could happen to anyone. Parents stopped letting their teenage daughters take buses alone. Schools increased security. Community meetings were held. The fear was palpable. "We need to catch this monster," Sunnyvale's police chief told the media. "A young girl is dead. Her killer is out there. We will not rest until justice is served." But weeks passed. Then months. Then years. And Karen Stitt's killer remained free. For 18 years, David Woods lived under a cloud of suspicion. Though he was never formally charged, detectives made it clear he remained their prime suspect. Every few years, as the case was reviewed or a new detective was assigned, David would be called in for questioning again. "Where were you the night of September 2nd, 1982? Did you have any arguments with Karen that night? Are you sure you went straight home?" The same questions, over and over. David's answers never changed because they were the truth. But truth without evidence is just a story. And investigators believed David's story had holes. The suspicion affected every aspect of David's life. Job applications that asked about criminal investigations. Relationships that ended when partners learned David had been questioned about a murder. Sleepless nights, wondering if he'd ever be arrested for a crime he didn't commit. "I loved Karen," David would say years later in court. "Not being able to protect her that night has haunted me for 43 years. But having people think I killed her, that was its own kind of hell." So, by 2000, DNA analysis had become standard in criminal investigations. The Sunnyvale Police Department, reviewing Karen's case as part of a cold case initiative, decided to test the biological evidence collected in 1982 against DNA from their prime suspect, David Woods. David agreed to provide a DNA sample. He'd always maintained his innocence. Now, finally, he could prove it. The DNA from the killer's blood and bodily fluids at the crime scene was analyzed. A complete genetic profile was developed. Then it was compared to David Woods' DNA. No match. After 18 years of suspicion, David Woods was definitively eliminated as a suspect. The relief was overwhelming. But so was the frustration. If David didn't kill Karen, who did? And why had investigators focused on him for nearly 2 decades while the real killer walked free? The case went cold again. The DNA profile from the crime scene was entered into SODIS, the National DNA Database. If the killer was ever arrested for another crime and his DNA collected, CODIS would alert investigators to the match. But no match came. The killer had either never been arrested or had committed his crime before DNA collection became standard. 17 more years passed. Technology advanced. DNA analysis became more sophisticated. Forensic genetic genealogy, using DNA to build family trees through distant relatives, began emerging as a revolutionary technique. In 2018, this technique caught the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo, who had committed dozens of rapes and murders in California during the 1970s and 1980s. Investigators had uploaded his DNA profile to GED Match, a public genealogy database, identified distant relatives, built family trees, and ultimately identified DeAngelo. The success of the Golden State Killer case transformed cold case investigations across America. Suddenly, cases that seemed unsolvable had a path to resolution. Detective Matt Hutchison joined the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety in 2015. By 2019, he'd been assigned to the cold case unit. One of the cases he inherited? Karen Stitt's murder, now 37 years old. Hutchison read through the entire case file, studied the crime scene photos, reviewed every interview, and he became obsessed. A 15-year-old girl, stabbed 59 times. Her killer's DNA preserved for nearly 4 decades. This case could be solved. Hutchison was certain. In early 2019, Hutchison received a tip. The source has never been publicly identified, but the information was specific. Karen Stitt's killer was likely one of 4 brothers from Fresno, California. 4 brothers. The tip didn't provide names, but it gave Hutchison a direction. He began researching families in Fresno with 4 brothers who would have been adults in 1982. He looked at criminal records, driver's licenses, property records, and he began the process of using forensic genetic genealogy to narrow down the suspect pool. Lamos yonder, one vergiv non let alone stedless. Hutchison sent Karen's killer's DNA profile to a specialized forensic genealogy lab. The process was complex and time-consuming. The DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch, where millions of people had voluntarily submitted their DNA to learn about their ancestry. The system identified genetic relatives, not exact matches, but distant cousins who shared segments of DNA with the killer. Genealogists identified these distant relatives and began building massive family trees. They traced relatives back through generations to find common ancestors, then worked forward through time, documenting all descendants of those ancestors. By early 2022, the family trees had narrowed the suspect pool dramatically. Combined with the tip about 4 brothers from Fresno, investigators focused on the Ramirez family. 4 brothers: Gary, Michael, Robert, and Daniel Ramirez. All from Fresno, all adults in 1982. In April 2022, investigators obtained DNA from Gary Jean Ramirez, age 75, living in Makawao on the island of Maui, Hawaii. The method of collection hasn't been publicly disclosed, but likely involved collecting discarded items: coffee cup, cigarette butt, napkin, that contained his saliva. The DNA from Gary Ramirez was analyzed and compared to the DNA from Karen Stitt's 1982 crime scene. Match. Definitive match. Statistical probability, beyond 1 in a trillion. After 40 years, Karen Stitt's killer had been identified. One is a Giamba. Gary Jean Ramirez was 38 years old in September 1982. He lived in Fresno, California, about 150 miles southeast of Sunnyvale. He had ties to the Bay Area, though the exact nature of those connections has never been fully explained. Why was he in Sunnyvale on September 2, 1982? What brought him to that bus stop where Karen waited? These questions have never been answered. Ramirez, exercising his right to remain silent, has never explained why he targeted Karen Stitt, never explained what drove him to commit such extreme violence against a 15-year-old girl. What we know is this: at some point in the years following Karen's murder, Gary Ramirez left California and moved to Hawaii. He settled in Makawao, a small town on the island of Maui. Population, about 7,000 people. A paradise of beaches, tropical weather, and natural beauty. For 40 years, while Karen Stitt lay in a grave and her family suffered without answers, Gary Ramirez lived in Hawaiian paradise. Did he ever think about Karen? Did guilt keep him awake at night? Or did he convince himself that after so many years, he'd gotten away with murder? During the investigation into Karen's murder, detectives discovered something chilling. Gary Ramirez might have killed before. In 1976, 6 years before Karen's murder, a young woman named Mary Bennett was murdered in California. Mary was a friend of one of Gary Ramirez's twin sisters. The details of Mary's murder have similarities to Karen's case: sexual assault, extreme violence. A killer who left biological evidence. Investigators are examining whether Gary Ramirez is responsible for Mary Bennett's death. If he is, It would mean Ramirez is a serial killer, someone who murdered at least twice, possibly more. How many other unsolved murders from the 1970s and 1980s might be connected to Gary Ramirez? That investigation is ongoing. For now, Ramirez has only been charged and convicted in Karen Stitt's murder. Voicing 5. The sun hadn't yet risen over the island of Maui when unmarked vehicles pulled up to a modest home in Makawao, a small town on the island's north shore. Inside that home, Gary Jean Ramirez, 75 years old, gray hair, living quietly in Hawaiian paradise, was about to face consequences for a crime he'd committed 40 years earlier. Detective Matt Hutchison had flown from California to Hawaii specifically for this arrest. After 3 years of investigation, after building family trees spanning generations, after confirming DNA matches with statistical probabilities beyond 1 in a trillion, this moment had finally arrived. Maui Police Department officers, coordinating with California authorities, positioned themselves around the property. Hutchison approached the front door with 2 Maui officers flanking him. He knocked. The door opened. Gary Ramirez stood there, looking confused. It was 5:30 a.m. Who knocks on doors at 5:30 a.m. except police? Gary Jean Ramirez, Hutchison asked. Yes. Milda. I'm Detective Matt Hutchison with the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety in California. I have a warrant for your arrest. Hutchison pulled out a document and began reading. Gary Jean Ramirez, you are under arrest for the murder of Karen Stitt, committed on or about September 3, 1982, in Sunnyvale, California.
For a moment, Ramirez stood frozen. 40 years. 4 decades since he'd sexually assaulted and stabbed a 15-year-old girl 59 times. Had he thought this day would never come? Had he convinced himself that after so many years he was safe?
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Ramirez was handcuffed. He said nothing, didn't protest innocence, didn't ask what this was about. He just stood there, silent, as 4 decades of freedom came to an end. He was transported to Maui Police Department for booking. His mugshot, taken at age 75, showed a frail-looking elderly man with long gray hair and glasses. You'd never guess this was someone who had committed one of California's most brutal, unsolved murders. But DNA doesn't lie. And the DNA from Karen Stitt's crime scene definitively matched Gary Jean Ramirez. But the comment in other would do. Established for me. 2. The breakthrough came in April 2022, 2 months before Ramirez's arrest. After forensic genetic genealogy had identified Gary Ramirez as the likely killer, investigators needed direct DNA confirmation. They couldn't compel Ramirez to provide a DNA sample without probable cause for arrest. But they found another way. They obtained DNA from one of Gary Ramirez's children. In California, law enforcement can legally obtain DNA from family members if those family members consent. The DNA from Ramirez's child was analyzed. The results showed a high probability, essentially certainty, that the child's father was the source of the DNA from Karen's 1982 crime scene. This was the final piece of evidence prosecutors needed. Combined with the forensic genetic genealogy identification and the child's DNA, they had probable cause for arrest. On August 2, 2022, the arrest warrant was executed. Ramirez appeared in Maui District Court on August 10, 2022 for an extradition hearing. California prosecutors were requesting he be transferred from Hawaii to Santa Clara County to face murder charges. Ramirez, represented by a public defender, could have fought extradition. He could have demanded a hearing, presented arguments, delayed the process for months. But he didn't. My client agrees to waive his right to contest extradition. his attorney told the judge. He will return to California voluntarily. Why did Ramirez waive extradition so quickly? The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA doesn't lie. Perhaps his attorney advised him that fighting extradition would only delay the inevitable while making him look guilty. Or perhaps after 40 years, some part of Ramirez was ready to face what he'd done. Within days, Ramirez was transported from Maui to Santa Clara County Jail in California. First-degree murder. The premeditated killing of Karen Stitt. Special circumstances. Murder during commission of rape. Special circumstances. Murder with torture. 59 stab wounds constituted torture. If convicted on all charges with special circumstances, Ramirez faced life in prison without possibility of parole. In California, special circumstances elevate murder charges to the most serious category. Cases that, before California abolished the death penalty, would have been death penalty cases. District Attorney Jeff Rosen assigned prosecutor Cynthia Hendry to lead the case. Hendry was known for her meticulous preparation and her ability to explain complex DNA evidence to juries. This case is 40 years old, Rosen told reporters at a press conference announcing the charges. But thanks to modern DNA technology and the dedicated work of Detective Matt Hutchison, we finally have justice for Karen Stitt. This arrest shows that no matter how much time passes, we will never stop pursuing killers. You need to know, the months following Ramirez's arrest were filled with legal maneuvering. His defense attorneys, a team of public defenders led by Rebecca Santiago, faced an almost impossible task: defending a client against DNA evidence with a statistical probability of accuracy beyond 1 in a trillion. Melody you answer, one body of knowledge alone to stave us. I'd done 3 times. The defense couldn't argue Ramirez wasn't at the crime scene. The DNA proved he was. Instead, they focused on procedural issues. 1. Chain of custody. Was the biological evidence from 1982 properly preserved? Could contamination have occurred over 40 years? Defense experts examined every evidence log, every transfer document, looking for gaps that could create reasonable doubt. 2. Forensic genetic genealogy. Validity. Was this technique scientifically reliable? Had investigators followed proper protocols when building family trees? The defense hired their own genealogy experts to challenge the methodology. 3. Collection of child's DNA. Was obtaining DNA from Ramirez's child legal and ethical? Did it violate Ramirez's constitutional rights? But every defense argument ran into the same wall. The DNA match was irrefutable. Multiple labs had confirmed it. The statistical probability was astronomical. And the chain of custody documentation showed the evidence had been properly handled for 40 years. I would not. Prosecutor Hendry built a case around 3 pillars. 1. DNA evidence, the cornerstone. Blood and bodily fluids from the crime scene matched Ramirez with certainty beyond reasonable doubt. 2. Forensic genetic genealogy. Expert witnesses would explain how family trees built through distant relatives identified Ramirez, then how direct DNA confirmed it. 3. Crime scene reconstruction. Medical examiners and forensic pathologists would testify about the 59 stab wounds, 18 to the heart, demonstrating the extreme violence and premeditation. Because of God was concerned. Not happened. As the trial date approached, Karen's family and friends prepared victim impact statements. For 40 years, they'd waited for this moment. Now they would finally have the opportunity to tell Gary Ramirez and the world what his actions had cost. Tracy Lancaster, Karen's best friend from Palo Alto High School, now in her late 50s, wrote, "Karen and I had plans. We were going to graduate together, go to college together, be in each other's weddings. She was supposed to be my children's godmother. Instead, I've spent 43 years visiting her grave.
David Woods, Karen's boyfriend who had left her at the bus stop, carried guilt that no therapy could fully resolve. For 18 years, police suspected me. But even after DNA cleared me, the guilt never went away. I left her alone. I should have waited. Every single day for 43 years, I've thought about that decision. Catherine Leszewski, Karen's mother. If still living in 2025, this detail is unclear. Prepared to face her daughter's killer. You took my baby girl. You stole her future. You stole our family's future. And then you lived in paradise for 40 years while we suffered. I hope you spend every day in prison thinking about what you did. When I was younger, 2 weeks before trial was scheduled to begin, Ramirez's attorneys requested a meeting with prosecutors. They had a proposal. In the conference room at Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, defense attorney Santiago made her pitch. My client will plead no contest to first-degree murder if you drop the special circumstances allegations. Prosecutor Hendry and DA Jeff Rosen considered the offer. A no-contest plea isn't the same as guilty. Ramirez wouldn't be admitting guilt, just acknowledging that the evidence against him was sufficient for conviction. But the result would be the same, a conviction, a sentence, no lengthy trial. The advantage for the prosecution: guaranteed conviction without the expense and uncertainty of trial. DNA evidence is powerful, but juries are unpredictable. What if one juror decided the 40-year-old evidence couldn't be trusted? The advantage for the defense: by dropping special circumstances, Ramirez would face 25 years to life instead of life without parole. At 78 years old, he'd never realistically be released. He'd have to live to 103 to reach parole eligibility. But technically, there would be a chance. After consulting with Karen's family, who supported the plea to avoid a traumatic trial, prosecutors accepted. On February 24, 2025, Gary Jean Ramirez appeared before Judge Hanley Chu in Santa Clara County Superior Court. How do you plead to the charge of first-degree murder of Karen Stitt? No contest, Your Honor. Judge Chu accepted the plea. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13, 2025. Udamas Yeldamer. When verlieben Santa Clara County Superior Court, Monday, May 13, 2025. The courtroom gallery was packed with people who had waited decades for this moment. Gary Ramirez sat at the defense table, looking frail at age 78. His attorneys had requested his face not be shown on camera due to threats. Social media had erupted with anger when news of his arrest broke, with people calling for vigilante justice. The media complied, showing only the back of his head or blurring his face in broadcasts. Judge Hanley Chu opened the hearing. This court has accepted Mr. Ramirez's no contest plea to first-degree murder in the death of Karen Stitt. Before I pronounce sentence, the court will hear victim impact statements. Tracy Lancaster, now 58 years old, approached the microphone. Her voice trembled but held steady. Karen Stitt was my best friend. We met in freshman year at Palo Alto High School. We had our whole lives ahead of us. We were going to graduate together, go to college together, be bridesmaids at each other's weddings. On September 2nd, 1982, Karen and I talked on the phone. She was excited about seeing her boyfriend. She said she'd call me the next morning to tell me about their date. I waited by the phone all day, September 3rd. She never called. That night, the police came to my house. They asked if I knew Karen Stitt. I said yes, she's my best friend. They told me she was dead, murdered. For 43 years, I've lived with that loss. I graduated high school without Karen. I went to college without Karen. I got married without Karen as my bridesmaid. My children don't have her as their godmother. Every milestone in my life has been marked by her absence. Mr. Ramirez, you didn't just kill Karen. You killed the future she would have had. You killed the person she would have become. You killed the family she would have built. And you stole from everyone who loved her.
Since Karen was brutally taken from us, there have been many unanswered questions. Why being the biggest? Why did you do this to our Karen? She was just 15 years old. She was waiting for a bus. She wasn't hurting anyone. Why did you choose her? Why did you rape her? Why did you stab her 59 times?
You'll never answer those questions, will you? You've stayed silent, and I suppose we'll never know. But what we do know is this. Karen is gone, but she was never forgotten. Not by me, not by her family, not by the detectives who never stopped working her case. And now, finally, you will face consequences. Tracy returned to her seat, tears streaming down her face. One of you given for you. David Woods, now in his late 50s, approached next. His guilt was palpable. My name is David Woods. I was Karen's boyfriend. I was with her the night she died. And I am the one who left her alone at that bus stop. For 43 years I've carried guilt that no amount of therapy can erase. If I had just waited 10 more minutes. If I had just stayed until her bus arrived. If I had just walked her all the way home. She'd be alive. For 18 years after Karen's murder, police suspected me. And I understood why. I was the last person to see her alive. I was her boyfriend. Statistically, it's usually the boyfriend. Even after DNA cleared me in 2000, the suspicion lingered. People would whisper. Friends would distance themselves. Relationships ended when partners learned I'd been questioned about a murder. But you know what's worse than being suspected of murder you didn't commit? Knowing that if you'd made one different decision, the murder never would have happened. I left Karen alone. I chose to avoid getting in trouble with my parents over staying with the girl I loved. And because of that decision, Karen died. Mr. Ramirez, you killed Karen, but I let you. I left her vulnerable. I gave you the opportunity, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Just because you've been caught, finally, and you will start serving your sentence, your punishment for your brutally gruesome crime, there will still never be closure. Karen is gone. We will never get her back. No amount of prison time will undo what you did. But at least you will finally face consequences. At least Karen's family can know that justice, delayed for 43 years, has finally arrived. Udan Yalaman, a representative of Karen's family, her cousin, Jennifer Stitt Thomas, read a prepared statement on behalf of relatives who were too emotional to speak. Karen Elizabeth Stitt was born on March 12, 1967. She was 15 years and 5 months old when Gary Ramirez murdered her. She was a daughter, a sister, a cousin, a friend. She was intelligent, kind, and had her whole future ahead of her. Karen loved music. She played piano. She wanted to study art in college. She talked about becoming a teacher. She had dreams, plans, a life she was building. All of that was stolen on September 3, 1982. For 43 years, our family has lived with a hole that can never be filled. We've celebrated holidays without Karen. We've had family gatherings where her absence is always felt. Grandchildren were born who never got to meet their aunt. And for 43 years, we've wondered, will her killer ever be caught? Will we ever have answers? Will there ever be justice? Today, we have partial answers. We know who killed Karen, Gary Ramirez. We know how. Sexual assault and 59 stab wounds.
We know modern DNA technology finally identified him after 40 years, but we still don't know why. Why Karen? What made you choose her that night? What drove you to such extreme violence? Why did you stab her 59 times, 18 wounds to her heart alone? Why did you leave her bound with her own clothing, hidden behind a wall, like garbage? You've never answered those questions. You've stayed silent, and we suppose we'll never understand the mind of someone capable of such evil. What we do know is this. You lived 43 years of freedom you didn't deserve. You moved to Hawaii, lived in paradise while Karen lay in a grave. You've had 43 years of sunrises and sunsets, meals with family, quiet moments. 43 years Karen never got. Today that ends. Today you go to prison for the rest of your life. And we hope, we pray, that every single day you're there you think about what you did. We hope Karen's face haunts your dreams. We hope guilt follows you until your last breath. Karen Stitt may be gone, but she is not forgotten. Not by us. Not by anyone who knew her. And now, thanks to Detective Matt Hutchison, Prosecutor Cynthia Hendry, District Attorney Jeff Rosen, and everyone who worked this case, Karen finally has justice. Judge Chu reviewed his notes. Then he looked directly at Gary Ramirez. Mr. Ramirez, you have pleaded no contest to the first-degree murder of Karen Elizabeth Stitt. The evidence against you is overwhelming. DNA from your blood and bodily fluids was found at the crime scene and on the victim's body. That DNA has been confirmed through multiple analyses to match you, with a statistical probability beyond 1 in a trillion. There is no reasonable doubt that you committed this crime.
Karen Stitt was 15 years old. She was waiting for a bus. She had her whole life ahead of her. You sexually assaulted her. You stabbed her 59 times to have those wounds to her heart. You bound her with her own clothing. And then you hid her body and walked away.
For 43 years, you lived free while Karen's family suffered. You moved to Hawaii, lived in a place many people consider paradise, while Karen lay in a grave. You had 43 years to come forward, to confess, to take responsibility. You never did. This court sentences you to 25 years to life in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. You will be eligible for parole after 25 years, at which point you will be 103 years old. Given your age and health, it is highly unlikely you will ever be released. You will die in prison for your crime. This sentence is not just punishment, it is justice. Justice delayed 43 years, but justice nonetheless. Karen Stitt and her family deserve no less. Gavel down. Gary Gene Ramirez was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He never looked at Karen's family, never spoke, never showed remorse. He was transported to Folsom State Prison, where he will spend the remainder of his life. Well, as of October 2025, Gary Ramirez is incarcerated at Folsom State Prison in California. He is 78 years old. His inmate number is classified for security reasons due to threats. He is housed in a unit for elderly and medically vulnerable inmates. Ramirez has given no interviews. He has never explained why he killed Karen Stitt. He has never expressed remorse. According to prison records, he spends most of his time alone, receives no visitors, and participates in no prison programs. He will be eligible for parole in 2050, when he would be 103 years old. No one expects him to live that long. He will almost certainly die in prison. When you want stage, investigators are still examining whether Gary Ramirez is responsible for other murders. In 1976, 6 years before Karen's murder. Mary Bennett, a friend of one of Ramirez's twin sisters, was murdered in California. The details are similar. Sexual assault, extreme violence, biological evidence left at the scene. DNA from the Mary Bennett crime scene is being analyzed and compared to Ramirez's DNA. If there's a match, Ramirez will face additional murder charges. This investigation is ongoing as of October 2025. If Ramirez is connected to Mary Bennett's murder, it would mean he's a serial killer, someone who killed at least twice, possibly more. How many other unsolved murders from the 1970s and 1980s might be connected to Gary Ramirez? Detectives are reviewing cold cases throughout California looking for similarities. The movie saw the Detective Hutchison continues working for the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety. After solving Karen's case, he was promoted and now leads the cold case unit. He has solved 3 additional cold cases using forensic genetic genealogy. Karen's case showed me that no case is ever truly unsolvable, Hutchison said in an interview after Ramirez's sentencing. As long as evidence is preserved, as long as we keep trying, as long as technology advances, there's always hope for justice. Hutchison, I can guess when David Woods, now in his late 50s, has spent 43 years carrying guilt for leaving Karen alone that night. After Ramirez's arrest, David sought extensive therapy to process his feelings. For 43 years, I've blamed myself, David told reporters after the sentencing. And part of me always will. But hearing the evidence against Ramirez, understanding that this was a predator who targeted Karen, maybe I'm not as responsible as I thought. Maybe nothing I could have done would have stopped him. Maybe he would have found another opportunity. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself, but I'm trying. David, whom I was young met, har du längt knowledge verlån till sedlas. To very different forces to the entire spay. Tracy Lancaster and members of Karen's family attended every court hearing related to Ramirez's case. After the sentencing, they felt a measure of closure, though they emphasized that closure doesn't mean the pain goes away. We finally have answers, Tracy said. We know who killed Karen. We know he's in prison. We know he'll die there. That doesn't bring Karen back, but it helps. After 43 years of wondering, we finally know. The Stitt family has established a scholarship in Karen's name at Palo Alto High School. The Karen Stitt Memorial Scholarship is awarded annually to a student studying art or music, 2 of Karen's passions, said Forgids. Karen Stitt's case proves the critical importance of properly preserving evidence, even when it can't be immediately analyzed. In 1982, Detective Robert Chen and his team carefully collected blood, bodily fluids, and biological material from the crime scene. They couldn't do much with it at the time. DNA analysis was still years away from being useful in criminal investigations, but they preserved it properly, documented chain of custody meticulously, and stored it in climate-controlled conditions. 40 years later, that evidence solved the case. Without that careful preservation, Gary Ramirez would never have been identified. The technology to analyze the evidence eventually existed, but only because the evidence itself had been saved. This lesson applies to every unsolved case. Evidence collected today might be useless with current technology, but in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, new techniques might emerge. Every piece of evidence preserved is a potential future solution. Karen's case was solved using forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. This technique works by 1. Uploading DNA from a crime scene to public genealogy databases. 2. Identifying distant relatives who share DNA segments with the suspect. 3. Building family trees to trace those relatives back to common ancestors. 4. Working forward through generations to identify all descendants. 5. Narrowing the pool of suspects based on age, location, and other factors. It's revolutionary because it doesn't require the suspect to be in CODIS, the criminal DNA database. It doesn't require the suspect to have ever been arrested. It only requires that some distant relative, third cousin, fourth cousin, someone the suspect might not even know exists, has submitted DNA to a public genealogy site. Since 2018, hundreds of cold cases have been solved using this technique, and thousands more are being investigated right now.
The
most important lesson from Karen's case: justice delayed is not justice denied. Gary Ramirez lived free for 43 years. He moved to Hawaii. He built a life. He probably thought he'd gotten away with murder, but DNA doesn't forget. Evidence doesn't expire, and dedicated investigators never stop pursuing justice. In 2022, technology caught up with Ramirez. In 2025, he was sentenced to die in prison. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they turn. This message resonates with families of cold case victims everywhere. Don't give up hope. The killer might be living free today, but tomorrow, or 10 years from now, or 40 years from now, science might advance enough to identify them. Evidence preserved today might solve the case decades in the future. Karen Stitt's family waited 43 years. But they got justice. Karen Elizabeth Stitt was born on March 12, 1967. She died on September 3, 1982, at age 15. She was a student at Palo Alto High School. She loved music and played piano. She wanted to study art in college and dreamed of becoming a teacher. She was waiting for a bus when a predator named Gary Jean Ramirez attacked her. He sexually assaulted her. He stabbed her 59 times, 18 wounds to her heart. He left her bound with her own clothing, hidden behind a cinderblock wall. For 43 years, her killer lived free in Hawaiian paradise. But DNA technology finally identified him. Detective Matt Hutchison and prosecutor Cynthia Hendry brought him to justice. And on May 13, 2025, Gary Ramirez was sentenced to die in prison. Karen's story is tragic. A life stolen, a future erased, a family left with decades of grief. But her story is also one of perseverance, of dedicated investigators who never gave up, of science that finally delivered justice. If you've watched this video to the end, thank you for honoring Karen's memory. Subscribe for more cold case documentaries and trial updates. Like if you believe DNA technology is revolutionizing justice. And comment, where are you watching from? What do you think about cases solved decades later? Share this video so Karen's story reaches as many people as possible. She deserves to be remembered not just as a victim, but as a person, a daughter, a friend, a teenager with dreams and plans and a future that was stolen. Karen Elizabeth Stitt, March 12, 1967 to September 3, 1982. Forever 15. Never forgotten. Age at murder, 38, 1982. Age at arrest, 75, 2022. Age at sentencing, 78, 2025. Sentence, 25 years to life. Current status, Folsom State Prison. Parole eligibility, 2050. Age 103. After 43 years, justice delayed but finally delivered.